Low quality fans of a high quality Bruins team, welcome back. It's the trade deadline video. We're doing it a little earlier this year because I really wanted to get it done before the Bruins started playing again after the All-Star break. I think it would be more fun to have that lead up and we can kind of go back to it and take snippets from it as the picture starts to solidify on the trade deadline. But right now, we have a ton of names we're going to talk about. This is likely a long video. I have broken it up into certain sections of players. You'll see those timestamps below. So if there's someone that you are kind of looking for, you can kind of guess where they're going to lie, whether they're a big fish, a offensive depth signing, a defensive depth signing, things like that you'll see listed below. I've left a little more space open than usual because, again, we're using Dom Luszczyszyn's player cards from The Athletic. I think they do a good job representing what we want to talk about, and I figure a little more empty space is going to help put those graphics up. We'll see how that goes. I want to answer a couple questions as well. The first one being, what are we actually trading away? Who's on the chopping block? And of course, you've got your Riley, your Smith, Nosek maybe. You've got typical guys that you would expect are a little higher on the contract that you need to move. But you're also looking at everybody else. Zaboral's absolutely an option. You're looking at Lauko and Lettieri are going to be options. Lysell, Lohrei, our first. All of those are on the trading block to make this team better this year because of the start that we've had. I would not lose sleep, and I want you to kind of mimic this. I would not lose sleep over losing virtually anyone in our prospect pool. If the deal is bad and it's for a bad player or just an outrageous cost, I get it. Like, that's frustrating. Lysell is a very good prospect. A guy that I really think is top 6 quality. But when you think about timelines, when you think about what we have now and what this team looks like in 2 years when he's really ready to be an impact player, if he gets moved to help now and it keeps this team like competitive, I'm very comfortable with that. So if I'm comfortable trading Lysell, I'm comfortable trading everyone, right? There's really only one name that I don't want to trade because I think it's a top 6 center, and I do not think he has the value of a prospect as a top 6 center. I heard you. I heard you guys just say, Lot Mellis! Yes, Lot Mellis is the one that I do not want to trade because I think that he is valued very little across the league. I do not want him to be a throw-in because I believe he's a 2C when he finally does reach the league, which should be in 3 to 4 years. I think it's going to be a long road, but I am so in on this guy, it's nuts. I will also cry if we trade Merkulov just because he's one of my fan favorites, and then I will also cry if they trade me. I mean, I might be on the block, guys. If it makes the team better, they might throw the channel in. I don't know. There's a real threat of it. I've been hearing rumblings. Devastating. I wouldn't report to the other team. Like, I'd make this really, really shitty for them. I would make this real uncomfortable. So I just want to be very clear about that. Also, people are wondering, what can we actually take on salary-wise? According to Cap Friendly, we can take on 50% of a $6.5 million contract, or that's what they project us to be able to take on at the trade deadline. But honestly, there isn't a contract that we can't take that exists in the league right now as long as we move out money with Smith or Riley. We need it retained. Those bigger contracts, we're going to have to send extra assets to be able to fit it. But at the end of the day, the money can work with virtually anything that is on the trade block. It just doesn't always make sense, if that makes sense. And the last question that I thought was interesting, on Twitter, somebody asked, how can we get rid of Frederick? This is a great opportunity to show you a card and to kind of explain it a little bit. First of all, we're not getting rid of Frederick. That'd be a very surprising move. It was my prediction that we would trade Frederick by the deadline. I was in a very different place with Frederick to start the season. But this is Trent Frederick's player card from Dom Luszczyszyn. The focus should not be on the top section. It should not. It should be where you see offensive plus minus, defensive plus minus, and usage plus minus. I don't know what the plus minus is all about, but those are percentile rankings for what they offer individually for the offensive and defensive, and then what they offer for usage as far as who they're competing with and who they're competing against. The offensive has to do with individual impact in the offensive zone or getting the puck up ice. Transitions, net front presence, It's highly weighed by expected goals, really, and impact on expected assists. That's kind of how they come to that number. And as a depth role, so let's be clear here, he's not in the 91st percentile offensively against top 6 guys. In other players being used in a similar way in a depth role on teams, he's in a 91st percentile offensively. That is very, very good, and it's the type of guy you want on your team for a cup run. Same thing goes defensively. He's not being compared to top 6 guys, but in a depth role, 92nd percentile defensively. And that's individual efforts. That's him stopping his expected goals against. It's him stopping scoring chances, stopping transition plays. There's a lot of numbers that go into it. I'm not trying to complicate it too much, but just know that those 2 bars are what I largely look at, and they have to do with how they are compared to other players at their time of ice, at their position. That's their percentile. Usage is a little more complicated, where it has to do with the teammates they're being used with, so their level of compete, and who they're competing against. So largely, Frederic doesn't have the best teammates in the world. I think Jay Fresh's cards actually do a really good job of this as well, another analytics guy. I was not able to get permission to use those, but I wanted to show a couple of them because they show a little bit different of a breakdown. But they had him as having one of the worst sets of teammates for like a depth role, which is interesting, but then you remember that he's on the 4th line a lot, and analytics don't love Foligno. They don't love Smith. They don't love Greer. Like, none of these guys are high in the whole analytics department. So when he's on the 4th line, his teammates are, in analytics' eyes, terrible. When he's on the 3rd line, I'm sure that boosts it a little bit. But he's also not playing against really crazy competition. Most of his usage is against bottom-tier lines. So that should be taken with a little bit of a caveat for that 91st and 92nd percentile. He's clearly not going to jump up on the 1st line and immediately be able to compete with 1st-line competition. Feel free to ask me questions about that in the comments, but again, most of the things I focus on these cards are the individual offensive aspect, the individual defensive aspect, and then their usage. I think those are very important bars on this graph, especially for younger guys like Trent Frederic, where if you're playing in that lower roles, you're not expected to have a high goals, high assists, the numbers above those bars. All that being said, Trent Frederic deserves to be on this team for a cup run. I think he's a solid depth guy that makes a difference in a playoff series, and I do not think you're going to move him unless someone really blows you out of the water or you have to move him for a huge fish. And again, that just doesn't seem like the move. At the end of the video, I'm going to mention my favorite moves, what I think the Bruins should do. But for now, starting now, we are about to go section by section on the options, all right? Not everyone's going to get a player card. That's too much work and it's going to take too long, but I am going to have quite a few names to get through here. So bounce around in the video if you'd like. I honestly feel bad that the video is going to be this long, but let's get to it. And let's start with everybody's favorite type of trade. It's the big fish. And we're going to start with my favorite guy, Tomas Hertl. Please. Damn it. I know it's not going to happen. So we'll move on. Adam Henrique. Of course, our Ducks connection brings this one out right away. We seem to make a trade with the Ducks every year, but there's a lot to like about this fit. He wins faceoffs. He has a shoot-first mentality, but can facilitate. Eats big minutes against competition that, let's be honest, is a lot better than what he's working with. There's a lot to like. Defensively, a little subpar. You don't love all of his defensive game, and he's prone to taking a bad penalty here and there. But the real reason I probably wouldn't pull the trigger on this is he has another year at $5.8 million. And this doesn't seem like the guy who fixes our center problem in a top 6 role. He is kind of on a steady decline. I don't think he's the right choice as far as big fish go to bring him in. And the cost is likely a first and a pretty decent prospect to start. So I don't see this being the improvement that we kind of need. Tomas Hertl, though, no, okay, Timo Meier. Let's talk about Hertl's line mate, Timo Meier. I love the optimism. A lot of you guys brought him up. You want to see him in the Spoked B. I get it. We can't compete for the price that he is because the Sharks will want a young roster player, a first, and at least 2 really good prospects. And I do not see us putting that together for a winger He's not replacing Pasternak because you'd prefer to have Pasternak. He is a minimum $10 million next year. He's an RFA with a $10 million starting point on that. It just would be a true rental. You wouldn't be able to make it work. You would expect to see the Hurricanes make a move on him. I think he's probably most likely going to be a Kane, which is scary. I mean, I get where you're coming from because he'd be an incredible add. Our top 6 would officially be bonkers. It would be insane to add him to that. DeBrusk moves down to the 3rd. All of a sudden, you have a Hall, Coyle, DeBrusk line that you really like. Frederick moves to the 4th. He's going to run that line. You like that. There are a million things to like about bringing him in, but it just doesn't make sense. We don't have the assets to compete with other teams. We do not have the cap space next year because, again, Pasternak's our focus to sign. He will not be a Pasternak replacement. I can promise you they're not going to bring him in thinking they can re-sign him and then they let Pasternak walk. It just doesn't work like that. And the price for him, I guarantee, includes Liesel and Lohrei plus a first and then some. It's going to be astronomical what they're going to ask for this guy. It does not make sense. He's a huge fish, though, and a very exciting player. You wish you could get him, but it's not reasonable. One of my favorite big fish options, Ryan O'Reilly. I know there's some pain inside when you think about him, but imagine Ryan O'Reilly comes in, bumps Coyle to the right wing, you got Hall on the left. That's your 3rd line. The numbers that show up right now, his analytics have to do with him facing top 6 competition. He wouldn't have to do that with us. He would be an unbelievable depth add for this season. He likely is a true rental, but going forward, you wouldn't hate signing him for a few more years, although he's probably looking for a long-term signing, just because at that age, you try to get as many years left in the league as you can. He's great in the dot, 200-foot player. I mean, through and through, this is a guy you add and feel so confident that he immediately jumps into the system and does great. I would have zero qualms about bringing in O'Reilly as a rental. I do not know exactly where the price lies right now. You'd think there's a first involved, and then I don't think you have to give up a great prospect, though. Should not be a guy, as it is with being a rental, should not be a guy that demands a huge cost, but certainly much more than you would expect for some of the depth options that we're going to talk about later. This is just a guy I really have my eye on. I think O'Reilly's a great fit for this team. I think he's been a great fit for this team for a long time. We've talked about him a few times in years past, and the Blues are finally bad enough to think about moving him. Now, I'm not so sure this guy fits in the whole big fish category, but Connor Garland is a name we talked about a lot previously, in previous years, I mean. He did sign that extension with the Canucks, but reports are now that the Canucks are trying to get out of the deal. He makes $5 million a year. He'll have 3 more years at that. He's a versatile winger, a middle 6 guy, but it looks like the front office for the Canucks have suddenly gone, ew, little guy gross. Even though he's kind of putting up decent numbers on a really bad team. I like his defensive game, especially considering he has no help in that category. I think his offense could pick up a lot with us in a depth role. Again, he's listed as a middle 6 guy, and he would be, 3rd line. But you'd really expect his game to grow a little bit with us and improve back to what we thought he could be. It's a big gamble because of the years left on the deal, but this is someone I'm at least calling about. I think he adds a versatility and some movement to our top 9 that could pay huge dividends when we find a matchup in the playoffs that we don't love. And you got to move some guys around. And I think this is a guy that you can kind of toss anywhere and be confident in the results you're getting. I just think the Canucks are such a dumpster fire that he can't do what he needs to do there. Again, that's a gamble, but it's something I'm looking at, especially if they're considering buying him out, which has been one report. I think that's a little ridiculous. But if the price is next to nothing, I'm looking at it. You're just likely not going to be able to get him with money retained, which is obviously an issue. Another big fish, another probable Kane. I don't know. It's Meyer or Tarasenko, right? Maybe it is Tarasenko going to the Canes. But it's another interesting ad option. I don't think it's the right fit for us, though. If we were going to take a swing for a top 6 guy or a guy who could fill in the top 6, it should be someone who can play center and you would try to re-sign for at least a couple of years. He would be a true rental. There's no way we would sign Tarasenko and then put a long-term deal in front of him. It just does not make sense. I do not like this ad at all, but a lot of people talk about him a lot. Just don't think it's the right fit for us. If you're thinking big fish, you're thinking Chychrun. You just are. There's no bigger fish on the market right now. He is a bona fide #1 defenseman. He has 2 more years on a very, very reasonable $4.8 million deal. Doesn't make a ton of sense, though. Now, he can play both sides of the ice. He's a great skater. He's good on the body. He wins board battles, sees transition well. I mean, I can say a billion positive things about the guy. And it's a great deal. But when you have a defensive 6, including McAvoy and Lindholm, with plenty of money tied up between them, Carlo and Grizz, who you like, although it does seem like the team in the front office is looking at bumping Grizz down a pair and bringing someone in for a top 4 role, likely what Chychrun will be doing. I think that's okay, but the assets you'd have to give up, I don't know if that's the right move for us. You would absolutely include Lysell in that deal, a first, and then one other really good prospect, and then maybe that's not enough. Because again, the fight for this guy has been going on for years, and the Yotes know they don't have to move him until they get a deal they really like. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Will be a great pairing with either McAvoy or Lindholm or Carlo. If you want Lindholm and McAvoy to work together, whatever. You could put him anywhere. He plays both sides too. You just, awesome player. Just don't know if that's where the assets and the salary cap that we do have, I don't know if that's where it needs to go. I'm lumping these 2 big fish together because they've been horrid this season. Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. Neither makes sense, guys. I'm sorry. I know so many of you want Patrick Kane or Toews. I know. I see the comments. But it doesn't make sense. Well, they're on a terrible team. Maybe this is just a result of being on a terrible team. Fine. Their contracts are massive. It would be the only move we'd be able to make. We'd have to give up hella assets because everyone's going to buy on them off of their name, not of what they've done this season. They've been horrible defensively. Offensively, about 50% plus of their points have come on the power play. Just not a good ad. Not a good ad, not a responsible ad. Yes, would Toews on the third line be great for the face-off aspect? Sure, but that's about it. These guys are not what they used to be. They would definitely improve on our team, but they would not be a big boost for the amount of assets and cap space we'd have to get them for. The words we'd have to give up to get them in, and then they're a rental. They're a true rental. We're not going to commit to either of these guys long term. Neither of these guys make any sense at all. It's going to be someone that is a little more dark horse-ish that will bring one of these guys in. I just don't see it being the Bruins, and I don't think the Bruins should do it. Our last big fish, Dylan Larkin. Yeah, a name a lot of you guys have on your mind. I like him. I just want to be very clear about one thing. He's a great player. He's a 2C on a championship team that isn't already loaded everywhere else. I think he's a very good player. If he wants out and his agent says, trade for him, we'll do an 8x8, $8 million for 8 years, I'm really thinking about that deal. I'm really looking at that going, you know what? Yeah, I think we can do that. A 2C that's a little high, but like the cap should be going up. I like it. If his agent says trade for us and we'll do 11 mil for 8 years, fuck off. It's not happening. We'd have to give up good assets. I'm okay with giving up good assets for Dylan Larkin. I really am. He could be a future at 2C for us, and I think he'd be very, very good. It's going to come down to what he wants contract-wise, though. And if Detroit allows his agent to talk to other teams legally, and the deal is there to be made for 8.5 or 8, I'm really thinking about that one. I don't think it comes to fruition. I do not think the Bruins move him in. He'd be a great add to our top 6 right now. He wouldn't have to play center right away. But I do not see this one coming to pass, unfortunately. Love the player, though. Those are your big fish, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the comments below tell me what I got wrong about them and why we definitely need them. And look, we're going to disagree about a lot in this video, and I respect that. I do. And I know some of you are very adamant that Patrick Kane is going to be a great Bruin. I know some of you are, and that's okay, but we disagree. But we're going to talk about some scoring depth ads. I'm going to list a bunch of names right now that I'm not going to do cards for. I just want you to know that I looked at them, and I just don't think they're right. But names like Comtois, Austin Watson, Colin Blackwell, Nicholas Delorier, none of them feel like actual upgrades in the bottom 6 to me. I don't like any of them enough to be like, yes, I'm moving guys for that. They'd be a lateral move at best, in my opinion, for the bottom 6. Frank Vitrano and Mike Hoffman, they're very similar. They have bad contracts, $3.7 million and $4.5 million. For a bottom 6 guy, it just does not make sense to me. Nick Bonino, thought a lot about him, but he just doesn't seem like a guy who's going to move the needle enough for me to go get him. Great, good in the dot, though. He's good in the dot. So, I mean, I looked at him a lot, and I just could not. You know how you just keep going over to the back to the same guy, and you're just like, I can't. It's just not there. It's just not the guy. Pius Suter, a guy I really liked a year ago, 2 years ago, with the limited cap space and him making 3.3 this year, and even if at 50% and all that, I don't think it's the right upgrade for the bottom 6, but I did take a long look at him. Evgeny Dadonov, I don't see the fit. I don't like the player. I haven't liked the player pretty much ever. He's terrible defensively. Doesn't move the needle for me as a team player. And lastly, Tyler Bertuzzi, way too expensive to pry from the Red Wings, I believe. I think they're going to ask for a decent little chunk. He is great offensively. Affordable against the cap this year, but he's a true rental, and defensively, I don't love his game. I don't think that's the right mixture of value and cost to me. I do not. But let's get to some of the scoring depth ads that I was a lot more interested in. And the first one's a total pipe dream. Tyler Toffoli, who actually might be better off considered a big fish, would be an excellent middle 6 ad. A fantastic, versatile winger, gets into the dirty areas, plays with some bite, lays the body. Like, this is a guy that you would like to see on the Bruins. I don't think it happens because the Flames need to lose like 8 games in a row for him to come through our doors. But God, the depth that he would bring. Oh, that'd be so much fun. Not going to happen though. Another scoring depth ad that I liked is Puljujarvi. Yeah, screw it. It's that name. Yes, from the Oilers. The guy who clearly wants out, and the Oilers want to get rid of. This cannot be a DeBrusk for Puljujarvi swap. No, this would have to be the Oilers being okay with like a Lauko and a middling pick. It can't eat away at our team at all. This would be a flyer on a guy who is cratered, but I believe that he would benefit a ton from a team that has an actual structure. No offense to the Oilers. I think we'd be a good fit for him. I think he'd thrive next to Coyle and Hall. I think he'd really enjoy it here, and I'd be very willing to take a flyer on him, move a prospect that I've kind of given up on with Lauko or someone of the same ilk. But again, he replaces Frederick on that third line, and Frederick gets to run the fourth line. Again, it just gives us more depth. That's a really smart ad to me, and yeah, it could blow up in our face if he does not improve by switching scenery. But I don't think there's anyone in the league who believes he isn't a little better than what he's shown. How about a favorite of mine? Andreas Athanasiou. Yeah, buddy. I can say that name. All speed, all offense, not good defensively. Would be a fun add to Coyle's line, I think. The statistics there don't back me up. They do not. You look at that card and you go, what are you talking about? And I am a big believer in mixing analytics and mixing what you think when you watch the game. The eye test, as some call it. I just don't think analytics are perfect. And I think this guy in a bottom 6 role, a little more protected toward the offensive side, I think he'd be a really, really fun add to Montgomery's system. I think he'd be extremely cheap to get. I would be really okay grabbing him for a little depth and seeing what he could do. That guy can skate, man. That guy can skate. In a similar fashion, Max Domi. He offensively gets to dirty areas, plays a very hard-nosed game. I like him. He'd be a third-line guy. He is horrid defensively. I mean, even worse than Athanasiou. But he's playing minutes that he doesn't belong on in Chicago. He's not a top 6 guy. He should not be up there. The price should be very cheap. Very cheap. Like a prospect. Not even like a high-end one, but a prospect and a middling pick, something like that. I'd be pretty comfortable bringing in Domi as a depth add. I want him bottom 6. I do not want him to touch the top 6. I do not think that's where he belongs. But again, not a bad trigger guy. If you put him next to Coyle, Guy wants to shoot? Yeah, I'm pretty okay with that. Oh, man. Noel Achari. A name that a lot of you have asked about. And I gotta say, you guys are pretty smart. He'd be a great upgrade over Nosek. I think he'd be really, really solid on that fourth line, being the go-to center, 200-foot player, great on the dot. Yeah, I'd like to see him return to Boston. Not a lot has to be said about him. We're mostly familiar with his game. If you're not, just know that actually the facial expression of the card is perfect. He just plays pissed, and he has a nose for the net. He really does. I'd be very okay with Achari coming back to the fourth line. I really would be. Barbashev. Now, this one was kind of interesting to me. Horrendous at the dot, 39% on the season. I think he would be another one of those good options to bump Frederick off the wing on the third line. He would certainly benefit from playing a bottom six role with us. Plus, he's a playoff-style performer, very physical. We could do a lot worse than Barbashev, and the price shouldn't be crazy steep. He's a name that I simply look at and go, yeah, that'd be fine. Nothing that would blow your mind or anything like that, but I think this fan base would really like what he does, and I think we could shelter him a lot more than he's been sheltered in St. Louis. I think he belongs in a lower depth role and see his game kind of flourish against lesser competition. Sam Lafferty. Gotta say, few of you guys brought him up. I wasn't very familiar with his game. I didn't spend a lot of time on him. But as I dug in, okay, be a solid upgrade on the fourth line. You'd have to give up next to nothing to get him. It shouldn't be expensive. He's a responsible player, great penalty killer, and a great penalty killer in front of some bad goalies, which is even more impressive. Moves the puck up ice well. I mean, he's not going to blow anyone's mind in any facet of the game, but this is one of those nice, solid ads that you feel a little more confident if you have a bottom six injury or anything like that, because you got this guy waiting in the wings, or maybe he replaced someone that just gets to come right back into their role for a team that is at 81 points through 50 games. So you'd feel pretty comfortable with that. I think he's more of a depth guy. He's like your 13th forward that you brought in just in case. I mean, really good job by you guys bringing him up. He just wasn't on my radar at all. I think this is a really nice little find by a lot of you guys. Nick Bukestad. I'm probably butchering that name. I feel like I've said that name 1,000 times, but he's an excellent option. He's not great on the dot, so I'd probably toss him on the wing, but his defensive game is incredibly solid for a team that does not have a lot of defensive prowess. He throws the body. Not a great scorer, but gets into the dirty areas and again just mixes shit up. He's a playoff type guy. Should benefit from some ice time down the lineup. He's actually my second favorite depth option out of all the names that I'm going to name, and I think he's an excellent match for Coyle. I think he'd work really, really well with Coyle, with the way he plays the game, the way he gets into dirty areas, the way he finds time to just get open and keep the puck moving. I think that'd be a very, very beneficial ad for us. Nico Sturm, I think that's a bottom six upgrade that makes sense. Great in the dot, great in the dot. Strong numbers, albeit mostly against bad competition this year, but it's not like he gets a lot of help from his line mates, so you could do a lot worse for a bottom six ad. I don't have a lot to say about him. I don't love that he has 2 more years at $2 million. It's doable, but you'd probably be looking at an ELC guy taking those minutes, like an entry-level contract guy taking those minutes, rather than putting another multi-million-dollar guy in your bottom six, on your fourth line, really. So, again, love the dot, his face-off potential, everything like that. I really like his game, but he's just a slight upgrade on the fourth line. You could do a lot worse, but you could also do a lot better. So we're going to talk about his teammate. A teammate who's been healthy scratch this season, and a teammate who I believe is this year's Arturi Lehkonen. He's this year's Barclay Goodrow, or Blake Coleman. The team who brings this player in is the team that wins the cup. I believe that. Kevin LeBanc, whatever. Dude, this is the guy. This is just the guy. Can't get along with the current coaching staff. Gotta imagine he likes it in Boston a little bit more. He is the perfect add to our bottom six. This is a guy, he's got 2 years left at $4.7 million. He's an incredibly versatile winger who gets results at both ends of the ice. He completely reinforces our scoring depth. He's exactly what we need. More than a big fish, more defensive depth. This is exactly who we need. I think I just gave away at the end where I'm like, I'm going to talk about my favorite ads. Here you go. This is the one. He's not overly lucky. He plays hard shifts against good competition on a team that's terrible. Sure, he takes way too many penalties. I get you on that. But I can live with it if he's bringing that scoring pop to the bottom six. This is my favorite option. My favorite option for us to pick up at the deadline. I don't even know if he's on the block. You got to imagine he is if he's getting healthy scratched. He should be very cheap to get. This is exactly the type of player that you look back at. You're watching the DVD of how the Bruins won the 2023 Stanley Cup, and you go, that addition right there was everything. That was the tipping point for a championship season. That's the guy. Whew! Let's talk about some defensive depth adds, shall we? Same thing as the last section. I'm going to cross off a bunch of guys that I looked at already. Joel Edmondson, not an upgrade over any of our current six and not worth another year, not including this year, another year at $3.5 million for a bottom pairing guy. Doesn't make sense. McDonough, basically the same thing, but he has 3 more years at $6.8 million. Even if they retain 50%, you don't do that. The guy's on a very steep decline right now. Maybe it's a product of where he is. I will allow that line of thought. It is not a worthwhile risk to bring him in. Klingberg makes no sense. Horrendous defensively, very good offensively. Having a tough season, but I believe he's better than he's shown. But what are you trying to add right now? A guy for the playoffs. Klingberg ain't that. He's not the guy who's going to win the board battles, block shots in front of the net. That's not who Klingberg is. That's not who you're looking to add to your 6th defenseman. I don't think he's the right move. David Savard, too long of a contract for not a big enough need, so I'm not looking there. Zaitsev's been really bad. Hamonic's also been bad. Kulikov. God, I looked at this name a lot. Dmitry Kulikov, getting absolutely plowed this year in Anaheim in a top 4 role. Might fit the bill for a 7th D, but there are better options. And I'm just not sure if it's a product of where he is or if where he is a product of how bad he is. Does that make sense? That sort of makes sense. I only have a couple names to list here. I'm going to list my favorite one last. I'm throwing all the structure out. Because this year, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of affordable options defensively. And then I thought about it and realized, yeah, that's every year, dumbass. So we're going to talk about a couple names here. Luke Schenn. We'll start. We'll have the Luke Schenn conversation, all right? I know so many of you guys commented, messaged me, Luke Schenn, Luke Schenn, Luke Schenn. I get it. I get it. He's been really bad. Really bad. Every year there's a name floating around that everyone seems to want, but for some reason I hate them. And I thought it was Bo Horvat this year, but that got out of the way so early that I get time to talk about Luke Schenn, who has had over 400 minutes with their best defenseman in Quinn Hughes. He's a penalty machine. He's a turnover machine, 5th in giveaways on the Canucks, 16th in takeaways, so that's not offsetting. Plays tough competition at times and gets smoked. Now look, Vancouver's goaltending has been horrendous, but it's largely part of a bigger picture where the defense has been non-existent in front of him. This guy comes in as a 7th D, and I get that's what you want. You want a 7th D, and I get you. I don't think you're wrong in that. But he's not the best option. And there's so much hype around him that it sounds like he's going to go for way more than he's worth. I mean, this is not the guy. Did we watch Tenorti together? Did we watch him together? Tenorti was a big, hulking defenseman who couldn't come up with the play when it needed to happen. He couldn't catch up. He could lay the body and fight, but he wasn't useful in the playoffs because he kept getting beat when it happens, when the occurrence was someone had the puck next to him. He kept losing battles. He was big and strong and nasty. But when it came to keeping the puck out of our zone or out of our net, he didn't offer enough. And that's what Luke Schenn is to me. He leads the league in hits. Whoop-de-fucking-do. I couldn't care less about that. He's a big, tough defenseman. But at the end of the day, he's going to be expensive to get, and he is not an upgrade over anybody on our defense right now. And I'd argue he might not be an upgrade over Strawman or Riley. I really don't have a lot of faith in this guy. And I get you're going to disagree. This doesn't mean I think you're a moron. It just means I don't agree. I do not think he's the guy, and I think we're wasting assets bringing him in because he does not help in a playoff series. That is very important to me. Now, there is another option on the Canucks who I think is a better option, but doesn't exactly fit the bill of what we need. Ethan Bear. I doubt they move him because they just traded for a 25-year-old and Anthony Beauvillier, so I think they think their timeline is anybody in the mid-20s sticks around. And he's been very good, albeit in a more sheltered role. But he's been very good for them on a very bad team. He doesn't have the same hype, so the cost isn't going to be the same. He doesn't take a mess of penalties, but he's responsible in his zone. Gets the puck up ice decently. Not a perfect fit, because again, it's a smaller guy that is more of a puck movement kind of guy. So I see where you're looking elsewhere. But I think you could do worse than getting him in. He is more of a Grizzlick, though, as far as defensive style, which I see that a lot of people don't want. Now, Jake McCabe is a much more interesting option. This would be a 4-bore upgrade. Likely too expensive for us to do, considering how much we like 4-bore, and this is not a massive upgrade in my book, but he does play very difficult minutes in a top 4 role against much better teams, and he continues to be a steady, strong defender who can get the puck up ice. 2 more years at $4 million a year is probably the breaking point, because you don't need that on your back end right now, especially if he's going to end up on the third pair. It's not fair of me to say not much of an upgrade over 4-bore. He is a legitimate upgrade over 4-bore. Just the price isn't right. But I did think he was worth a mention. But my favorite, amongst many of your favorites, a bunch of people actually reached out to me about him, Vladislav Gavrikov. Gavrikov. I'm keeping that in. Vladislav Gavrikov. That's even more fun. I like him in a depth role, and I really don't hate the idea of grabbing him. Big body, plays big minutes, has offensive upside, but he doesn't actually lay the body as much as you think, which is fine, but he's still there physically. He's present, but he wins board battles. He's a big, strong defender. And I think he's the kind of guy that, yeah, we need a little more depth defensively. Maybe he doesn't force someone out of the lineup, but he's a really good option to just toss in if there's an injury. He is prone to a bad defensive mistake every now and again, and his numbers look terrible as far as the analytics go, but I'm not looking at him in a top 4 role to eat big minutes. We've got guys for that. If you want to get a cheap 7th defenseman, they retain some money, and we just grab them and slot them in, I am super okay with getting Gavrikov. I think that's the pick defensively. There's more sections to this, by the way. This one is memes that people mentioned in the Twitter comments that I have to mention because I promised I'd mention every name they put in. Vemelka. We don't need goaltending help. Petr Tenkrat. Forgot about him for a little while, but he's very retired. Bo Horvat. Phil Carter's godson, Connor McDavid. Sounds like a scrub to me, Phil. I don't like it. Zdeno Chara. Stop it. Just stop it. Nick Ritchie. Go fuck yourself. You know what you're doing. And Tom Wilson. Which, honestly, would be a really good ad for a playoff run. So, that's weird to say out loud. Trades that aren't happening that people brought up to me. And they're not happening for the exact reasons these people know. So, I'm not, dunking on you. Ryan Hartman and Sam Steele are both playing important roles, although they probably shouldn't be, particularly Sam Steele. Playing important roles in Minnesota, and Minnesota simply needs to crater for either of these guys to get moved. They won't. Boone Jenner. Columbus probably doesn't move him because they need the Gaudreau timeline to match up, and he's on a good contract for 3 more years, so that's probably not happening. Braden Shen and Josh Anderson. Way too much money for way too long. Don't even know why we would do that. Miles Wood. Devils are too competitive. They aren't moving him. But I do like that you subscribe to the Church of Jack Edwards. It's very good for you. Colton Parayko. We are not taking on 7 years at $6.5 million for a guy who will live on our second pair and won't even see special teams time with us. Marcus Foligno. God, what an ad that would be. But again, Minnesota needs to bottom out and the West is just too wide open. Oscar Sundqvist. I actually will show what he's been doing. He's been terrible. He's been really bad. I don't really want him. Erik Karlsson doesn't make sense. We won't give up assets for a guy making $11.5 million for the next 4 years. Brock Boeser, they just traded for 25-year-old Anthony Beauvillier, so they likely think Boeser fits their timeline. JT Miller, too much money and time for a guy no one believes will live up to his contract. Center or not, this would be a bad idea. Phil Kessel, honestly, I don't think this happens just because Phil Kessel doesn't want to move again and he has a no trade clause, but it would be kind of fun, right? We shouldn't do it. We shouldn't, but it would be fun. Here's a list of guys that you guys brought up that are all too young and too good to be moved by their team unless their team decides to be super stupid. So, Tim Stutzle, Josh Norris, Clayton Keller, Barrett Hayton. God, I really like Barrett Hayton. Zach Jones, Yamamoto. I didn't even look at his first name, and I can't remember it right now. Lawson Krause, Tanner Jeannot, and Isaac Lundestrom. Yeah. All too young and too impactful to get moved at the time. Last section. Trades that absolutely should not happen, that some people seem to want to do. Matt Dumba. We need defensive depth. I get that. But that's not what Dumba is. He eats a large portion of the cap, even if it's retained. And he'll end up being a true rental. We'll have to give up assets to get him, albeit not crazy assets, because it seems like Minnesota's ready to move him. Yeah, I'm not bolstering our bottom pair or bringing a seventh D for Dumba. I think Dumba's still very good. He's not the right fit for us, and I think the assets will be crazy. Mikael Granlund. He's just not been good enough. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Too much money for a steadily declining asset. Just a really, really bad idea to get him on the roster. A lot like the McDonough stuff. The worst one, and I love you guys. I really do, and I love this guy. But Milan Lucic. Here's the player card. Woo! $6 million he makes. He makes $6 million to be maybe the worst guy on that team. I love the guy, but that makes no sense. At the end of the day, my favorite picks from each section, the big fish, O'Reilly for sure. I think he makes the most sense, even if that is a true rental. Scoring depth, LeBlanc, man. Oh my God. Bukestad is a close second, so props there. But I did my whole spiel on LeBlanc. I think he's the best. And defensive depth, I was having trouble deciding between Ethan Bear and Gavrikov, and it's Gavrikov because he's going to play more of a role in a playoff series, in my opinion, especially defensively, than Ethan Bear would. So, in my opinion, what the Bruins should do this year is bring in Kevin LeBlanc and Vladislav Gavrikov. Those are your two assets that you bring in as scoring depth and defensive depth. The big fish, to me, just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Even in an all-in kind of year, it doesn't feel like any of the big fish available actually do what we need them to do. Fit the system, add a bigger punch to our top six. Sure, the talent trickles down. I'm not saying our team gets worse if you add Tarasenko. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. Just doesn't seem to make a ton of sense if you really are trying to do this balance of give us the best team we can this year, don't disrupt the chemistry, add depth in case of injuries, but don't crater everything else. Do not throw away every bit of future you got. All right, guys, that does it for me. I hope you enjoyed the video. I took so much time and work to put together, but I thought I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot about players. I had a really good time with it, and I hope you did too. You probably watched this over a couple of different sessions because this is a long-ass video. Feel free to bring up stuff that I got wrong, because that's part of the fun. And feel free to argue with me, respectfully if you don't mind. But look, we all have different opinions of these guys. So let's argue. Just, be respectful. Go Bees. Go Bees!